Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we're looking at the 2025 New York City mayoral election, now with less than 2 weeks to go until election day, where things stand at this current point in time, heading into the last few days of the campaign. So if you've not been covering or following the 2025 New York City mayoral election, where things currently stand is the current mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, initially was running for re-election as a Democrat, though polls early on showed him having really no chance at winning a Democratic primary. He was very disapproved of in the race. So Adams ultimately decided to run for re-election as an independent and opened up the Democratic primary. As Adams was a Democratic mayor, it opened up the primary for a new Democratic candidate to emerge. And it very quickly became a very competitive primary between Democrat Zohran Mamdani, a New York State Assembly from the 36th District, which is representing the Queens neighborhood of Astoria, and Andrew Cuomo, who was the former governor of the state of New York, who resigned in 2021 and has a lot of scandals following him. The New York City mayoral race was hoping to be Cuomo's comeback into elected office and elected politics. Those were the top two Democrats going at it. And what ultimately ended up happening was on the Democratic primary for New York City, Zohran Mamdani outperformed what many, including myself, my own polling and expectations were for that primary. I thought it was going to be close, but Zohran Mamdani won by over 12 points when everything was said and done, and he became the Democratic nominee. Now, as for Andrew Cuomo, Cuomo decided within a month of losing the primary to launch a third-party bid for New York City mayor as an independent after seeing some early polling numbers which suggested he would be polling at least in second place to Zohran Mamdani in that election. So at the time, right after the primary, it was Mamdani and Cuomo running, with also Mayor Eric Adams also running as an independent, and the Republican nominee from 2021, Curtis Sliwa, winning the Republican nomination again and going to be the Republican nominee for 2025. So that's where things stand in terms of that right after the campaign started. Now, in the last month or so, Eric Adams has dropped out of the race. It is now a three-person race between Zohran Mamdani, Curtis Sliwa, and Andrew Cuomo. Now, obviously, what you've come here to see is how this race is currently looking. And we can look at the polling, where thus far, Zohran Mamdani has a commanding lead in this race over Cuomo and Sliwa. And we have had some polls since Eric Adams dropped out of the race. We've only had about 4 thus far, but they show that Adams dropping out has really not changed the race all that much. The last poll taken before Adams dropped out showed Eric Adams getting roughly around 8% of the vote, where Mamdani had 45, Cuomo 27, and Sliwa 11 points. That was from Beacon Research and Shaw Company, which is the Fox News poll. And now that Adams is out of the race, they have done another poll which showed that Adams still has about 2 to 3% support, even though he dropped out. But Zohran Mamdani's numbers have gone up to 49%, where Cuomo is at 28 and Curtis Sliwa is at 13. The overall averages of this race show a very commanding lead from Mamdani, where Mamdani is at around 45.67% when you take all the polling averages and add them up, essentially. Mamdani is sitting around 45.5 percentage points. Andrew Cuomo is polling in second place, roughly around 30%, around 29.77%, depending on which average you're looking at. While the Republican Curtis Sliwa is currently polling in third, around 16 points in the Decision Desk HQ average, and there's still roughly around 9 points or so, 9% of voters who are undecided in this race. Now, just quick math here will tell you the amount of support that each candidate is getting shows that Zohran Mamdani is very likely to become the next mayor of New York City. Mamdani in a three-person race is polling at 45% of the vote, which leaves about 55% of the vote left out there that is not currently consolidated behind Zohran Mamdani. But when you just do the math there, that 55% that's left outstanding, Cuomo's only getting roughly 30% of that vote, which at this current point in time, of Cuomo and Sliwa, it's very, very clear that Cuomo is the only one that has even a remote chance of getting close to Mamdani's numbers. Curtis Sliwa does not have any pathway to victory in this race, and the polling data has shown that pretty much all along. For instance, in the most recent poll from Gotham Polling and Analytics, it showed what a two-person matchup between Mamdani and Cuomo and Mamdani and Sliwa would ultimately look like. For Cuomo versus Mamdani, that should be a relatively close race. Mamdani getting 45%, Cuomo 41%, 15% of voters are undecided. So even in that matchup, Mamdani's leading and could still win that race, but it'd be a lot more competitive. Whereas Mamdani versus Sliwa, it's still a pretty big blowout of a race. 47% for Mamdani, 32% for Sliwa, 22% undecided in that one. So the polling has shown the only way this race gets competitive would be if Curtis Sliwa drops out and it becomes a two-person race between Cuomo versus Mamdani. And even then, I would still go as far as to say that I expect Zohran Mamdani would win the election between him versus Cuomo, but by a much smaller margin than it's going to happen on election night itself. But just the math right now, Curtis Sliwa in third place, getting around 15% of the vote or so, is already taking a very significant amount of vote away from what could be won by Andrew Cuomo or Zohran Mamdani, so much so that it really does not provide any pathway to victory for Cuomo, and we already know Sliwa has no chance of running. It's also very representative of how well Zohran Mamdani is doing in this race, as I'm about to show you the polling trend in the New York City mayoral race, that Mamdani, in a three-person race like this, is able to get at least 45% of the vote before the undecided and other voters ultimately decide what to do on election day. He's already getting a very large command of the race at 45%. So just to show you here, this is the Decision Desk HQ polling average of this race, and I think it really does a good job at show you how this race has gone over the course of it. Right after the primary, there were questions of, yes, Zohran Mamdani won the Democratic primary, but what would the voters in the general election do when Andrew Cuomo would probably have a better chance at winning with a more spread out electorate than just a Democratic primary? And it started with Cuomo actually leading for the first few days over Mamdani 39-25. Now, as time went on, it very quickly became that Zohran Mamdani was the favorite in this race. We saw Mamdani officially overtake Cuomo in the polling around July 2nd, and since then, it has really not looked back at all. Zohran Mamdani's been in the driver's seat in this race. At one point, there were 5 candidates running, so there was a lot of the anti-Zohran Mamdani vote being split among Cuomo, Sliwa, Mayor Adams, and another independent, Jim Waldron. Waldron ultimately drops out of the race around the beginning of September 2nd. Then it becomes a 4-person race of Mamdani versus Cuomo versus Sliwa versus Adams. Now, Cuomo's numbers have not really changed at this point compared to when Mamdani took the lead. Mamdani's numbers have gone up about a point or so. Curtis Sliwa and Eric Adams have remained pretty consistent as well. We get to around the beginning of October, it's getting very clear that neither Cuomo, Sliwa, or Adams are going to be able to catch Mamdani with all of them in the race. Eric Adams decides to drop out. He does not necessarily endorse Cuomo or Sliwa. Actually, I think he talked about issues with both of them when dropping out of the race, but that leaves some support left out there to be grabbed by Cuomo and Sliwa. And it seems thus far, a lot of that support, that 8%, went to Cuomo, because Cuomo went from 26.6% to roughly about 31% over the course of 2 weeks or so once Adams dropped out. Now, Curtis Sliwa did also go up about a point, and then around now, he's gone up to about 16.6%, where Cuomo has remained right around 31%. So it seems that Adams' support has gone mostly to Andrew Cuomo and Curtis Sliwa. A little bit may have gone to Zohran Mamdani, who went up from 44.6 to about 46.8 around a few days ago. Now it's back down to 45.4 in the polling averages. But this race is really looking like one that, if it was a 2-person race, Zohran Mamdani has the chance at potentially losing. But with a 3-person race, it definitely seems like a win that will be coming for Zohran Mamdani and likely will not take too long on election night to make that call. And again, as a first-time candidate of this magnitude for New York City mayor, you do have to give Zohran Mamdani a lot of credit as essentially a political outsider, getting 45% of the vote against the past Republican nominee for mayor for 4 years ago and the former governor of the state of New York, 2 names that are probably very well known, especially Cuomo's name in New York City, and Mamdani is still commanding 45.4% of the vote. So what to make of this race is that the way the race has gone down in this 3-person lane, Zohran Mamdani is going to win, and there's not enough vote left out there for Cuomo or Sliwa to match Mamdani's numbers. Even if Andrew Cuomo won every single undecided voter, that would still get him roughly around 5 to 6 points below Zohran Mamdani's number. Now, let's say hypothetically in the next 2 weeks, for some reason, Curtis Sliwa drops out of the race. There's little reporting at all to suggest that even be a possibility. Curtis Sliwa has gone after Andrew Cuomo just as much, if not more, than Zohran Mamdani, and he will not be dropping out of this race according to all reports. But if that were to happen, well, then it becomes a more interesting race because Sliwa is getting roughly around 17% of the vote if you round up from 16.6. That would give Cuomo a legitimate chance if he can win most of Sliwa's support and making this a more competitive race. But the point's been made all along of a three-person race, there's no way Zohran Mamdani can lose because there's not enough anti-Zohran Mamdani vote, especially when Mamdani is polling so strongly at 45%. There's just not enough vote out there for a three-person race for two opponents of Mamdani to catch him. Now, in a head-to-head matchup, it's possible for Cuomo to win, but even then, I would still say if it's Mamdani versus Cuomo, I actually do think Zohran Mamdani would still win, and probably by around 10 points, due to the fact there are a lot of both independent, Republican, and Democratic voters who disapprove of Andrew Cuomo very heavily, almost as much as Curtis Sliwa, which is funny because a Republican in New York City you would think would not be approved of well at all, but Andrew Cuomo is just as bad as Curtis Sliwa in most opinion polling, and that is really hurting his chances that maybe there's another Democrat running as an independent instead of Andrew Cuomo. Maybe this would be a more competitive race, but Andrew Cuomo has certainly his own likability issues, and that is really hurting him in this race as well as the main opposition to Zohran Mamdani. Now, Cuomo, I think, is still going to do well enough to make this race relatively competitive, but I don't think he's going to be able to get close enough for this race to really get competitive. Meaning, of the ranking of around a 15-point being a safe margin, I think it's possible we see this race fall under 15 points, but I don't think we're going to see a race that falls under like 7 or 8 points to really be like, ooh, could this race actually get close? I think Zohran Mamdani has this race. I think he's going to win. I think he's going to win within the first hour on election night, maybe even within the first half hour, due to the fact Cuomo and Sliwa are just splitting too many votes, and Mamdani already has such a commanding lead of the general election votes that, like he did in the primary, that he also has now for New York City. Now, just to give you an idea of what the primary looked like, as I alluded to this, in 2025, the Democratic primary, Zohran Mamdani ended up winning 56.4% to 43.6% over Andrew Cuomo of the roughly 1,071,000 voters who voted in that Democratic primary. Definitely a lot higher turnout than it was even back in 2021 for Eric Adams. Now, it was on the first round only around a 7-point victory or so, which is still very significant for Mamdani, but you saw Mamdani doing very well in Queens, you saw him doing very well in Brooklyn, and you saw him winning Manhattan. Now, in the general election, it's going to be interesting because the third place candidate in a lot of these election results was Brad Lander, a more liberal Democrat who was allied with Zohran Mamdani in helping stop Andrew Cuomo in the final days of the campaign. So now in a general election matchup where it'll be Mamdani, Cuomo, and Curtis Sliwa, it seems more likely that the vote will be split against Cuomo and Sliwa against Mamdani. So it's possible we could actually see Zohran Mamdani win Manhattan, Queens, Brooklyn by even larger margins than he did in the primary against Cuomo. Now, Cuomo did win the Bronx 52-34, so if we're talking about election night as a potential area that we could maybe see Andrew Cuomo beat Zohran Mamdani in, I think the Bronx is one area that could potentially go his way. We'll have to wait and see how that all unfolds. Another key area is Staten Island, which did vote for Andrew Cuomo 46-38, though in the 2021 New York City mayoral election, Staten Island was the only borough of New York to vote for the Republican Curtis Sliwa. I think it's more likely Staten Island will vote red for Sliwa than for Andrew Cuomo, but that could certainly be a possibility as well. But how this election goes, I think overall, once all the votes are counted, I think we're looking at around a 10 to 15 point win for Zohran Mamdani over Andrew Cuomo. Right now, I have it right around that 14-point mark. And we're looking at an election where I think we see Queens go for Mamdani, we see Brooklyn go for Mamdani, we see Manhattan go for Mamdani. I think those three are pretty much locked in how I think they're going to go. The two wild cards are the Bronx and Staten Island. Because Sliwa got 66.5% of the vote, but now with both Mamdani and Cuomo running, I think we're going to see Curtis Sliwa still win Staten Island, but I think it's going to be by a smaller margin due to the fact that I think there will be a lot of voters that will vote for Cuomo as the top choice against Zohran Mamdani to try and stop him becoming mayor. So I think Staten Island goes to Curtis Sliwa, but by a smaller margin. The Bronx, I think overall, we're going to see, I think, Zohran Mamdani win it, but I think this is going to be the closest borough to watch for in terms of a Cuomo versus Mamdani election in the Bronx for who may win this one. So I think the Bronx is going to be close. I think it goes to Mamdani, but I think it goes for him by under 10 points in one of the more closer boroughs to watch. We'll have to wait and see how that ages, though, how that finds out. So bottom line, predicting a Zohran Mamdani Democratic win for New York City mayor in around 13 to 14 points is currently how I have it going right now. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did. I have some exciting videos planned for the next few days and for the next week as well that I think you're really going to enjoy, so make sure to stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you in a future video.